In the vastness of space, where civilizations rise and fall like distant stars, there exists a universal truth that every species learns. Never underestimate the bonds that tie a mother to her young, and never ever underestimate what a human will do when faced with innocent suffering. Commander Sarah Chun had seen horrors that would break lesser minds. She had witnessed the fall of entire worlds, the extinction of ancient races, and the cold mathematics of galactic warfare. But nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared her for the sight of 3 tiny dragon hatchlings huddled around their dying mother, their crystalline tears catching the harsh light of twin suns as they whispered words that would echo across the galaxy. "Please don't hurt us. Mommy is dying." What happened next would redefine humanity's place among the stars, challenge every assumption the Galactic Council held about the barbaric human race, and prove that sometimes the most powerful force in the universe isn't advanced technology or superior firepower. It's the simple, inexplicable human refusal to walk away from those who need help. This is the story of how one human's choice in a moment of crisis sparked a revolution that would shake the foundations of galactic civilization itself. The emergency beacon cut through the silence of deep space like a knife through silk. Commander Sarah Chun stood on the bridge of the human exploration vessel Defiance, watching the pulsing red on the tactical display with growing concern. 3 days into what should have been a routine survey mission in the Outer Rim territories, they had encountered nothing but empty space and dead worlds. "Now this." "Report, Lieutenant Martinez," Sarah commanded, her weathered hands gripping the railing that surrounded the command platform. "Unknown vessel, Commander. The beacon signature doesn't match any in our databases. It's broadcasting on multiple frequencies simultaneously, including some we've never seen before." Martinez's fingers danced across his console, pulling up additional data streams. "The ship appears to be heavily damaged and drifting. No response to our hails." Sarah studied the approaching vessel through the main viewer. It was unlike anything she had ever seen. Organic curves that seemed to flow like water frozen in time, with what appeared to be scales covering its hull. The ship was massive, easily 3 times the size of the Defiance, but it moved with the sluggish drift of something dying. "Life signs?" she asked. "Difficult to determine, ma'am. The hull composition is interfering with our sensors, but there are definitely energy signatures that suggest life support systems are still functioning." "Barely." Sarah made her decision quickly. In her 15 years of service, she had learned to trust her instincts, and right now they were screaming that whatever was on that ship needed help. "Take us alongside Martinez. Prepare a boarding party." "Commander," came the voice of her first officer, Lieutenant Commander James Burke. The tall, thin man approached with obvious concern etched across his features. "With respect, we have no idea what we're dealing with here. This could be a trap, or worse. Protocol suggests we should report this to command and wait for instructions." Sarah turned to face him, her dark eyes reflecting the glow of the bridge displays. "Protocol also says we render aid to any vessel in distress, regardless of origin." "How long has that beacon been broadcasting?" Martinez checked his readings. "Based on signal degradation, approximately 18 hours. 18 hours of screaming for help into the void," Sarah said quietly. "No, we're going aboard. Assemble a team. Full environmental suits, medical kit, and standard armament. Whatever's over there has been waiting long enough." An hour later, Sarah led her 5-person team through the airlock of the alien vessel. The moment they stepped inside, she knew they had entered something extraordinary. The corridors weren't simply built. They were grown with the same organic curves as the exterior. Bioluminescent panels provided a soft, blue-white light that pulsed gently, like a heartbeat. "Artificial gravity is functional," reported Dr. Elena Vasquez, the team's medical officer and xenobiologist. "Atmosphere is interesting. High oxygen content, traces of elements I don't recognize." The environmental suits stay on. They move deeper into the ship, following the strongest life sign readings. The walls were warm to the touch, and Sarah could swear she felt the ship breathing around them. Emergency lighting cast strange shadows as they navigated corridors that seemed designed for creatures much larger than humans. "Commander," whispered Sergeant Mike Torres, their security specialist. "You need to see this." Sarah moved to where Torres stood before a massive doorway. The entrance was partially sealed by what looked like emergency blast doors, but there was enough space for a person to squeeze through. Beyond, she could hear something that made her blood run cold, the sound of crying. Not human crying, but something that spoke to the universal language of grief and pain. "Dr. Vasquez, what are your readings showing?" "Multiple life signs, but they're weak. Whatever's in there is alive, but not for much longer." Sarah didn't hesitate. She squeezed through the gap, her team following close behind. What she found on the other side challenged every assumption she had about the universe. The chamber was enormous, clearly some kind of command center or ceremonial hall. In the center, on what appeared to be a raised dais, lay the largest creature Sarah had ever seen. It was undeniably draconic, serpentine neck, powerful limbs, wings that even folded spanned nearly 30 meters. Its scales were deep emerald green that seemed to shift and shimmer in the ambient light, and its size was so immense that Sarah had to crane her neck to see its head. The dragon was dying. That much was obvious from the multiple wounds that covered its massive form, the labored breathing that shook the entire chamber, and the pool of golden blood that had spread across the floor. But what made Sarah's heart skip a beat were the three small forms huddled against the great creature's neck. Baby dragons, no larger than house cats, with scales that caught the light like jewels. Their tiny wings trembled as they pressed close to what could only be their mother, and their cries filled the air with heartbreak. "Dear God," whispered Dr. Vasquez. As if sensing their presence, the massive dragon's head turned slowly toward them. Her eyes, ancient, intelligent, and filled with pain, fixed on Sarah. When the dragon spoke, her voice resonated through the chamber like distant thunder, but somehow Sarah understood every word. "Humans," the dragon said, her mental voice touching each of them with a gentleness that contrasted sharply with her immense presence. "I had hoped, but did not dare to believe." One of the baby dragons looked up at the approaching humans with eyes that held far too much intelligence for such a young creature. When it spoke, its voice was like the tinkling of silver bells, fragile and afraid. "Please don't hurt us," the little dragon pleaded, pressing closer to its mother. "Mommy is dying, and we don't know what to do. We're scared." Sarah felt something crack inside her chest. She had seen warfare, had witnessed the destruction of entire colonies, had held dying friends in her arms as enemy fire rained down around them. But this innocent plea from creatures that should have been the stuff of legend nearly brought her to her knees. "We're not here to hurt you," Sarah said aloud, not knowing if the young dragons could understand her as she had understood them. She slowly removed her helmet, despite Dr. Vasquez's sharp intake of breath. The air was sweet and clean, with an underlying scent of flowers and rain. "We heard your distress beacon. We came to help." The mother dragon's eyes widened with something that might have been hope. "You understand us?" "Yes," Sarah replied, approaching slowly with her hands visible and empty. "My name is Sarah. These are my friends. We're explorers from a planet called Earth." "What happened here?" "Pirates," the dragon replied, her mental voice growing weaker. "They attacked our transport ship while we were traveling to the Council Worlds for the Harmony Festival. They wanted our cargo, precious metals, and gems from our home world of Draconos. When we refused to surrender, Her great head dropped back to the floor with effort. "They used weapons that bypass our natural defenses. Poison that burns from within." Sarah knelt near the dragon's massive head, amazed at her own calm in the face of such an impossible situation. "How long do you have?" "Hours at most. The poison spreads through my system, shutting down my organs one by one. But my children..." The dragon's eyes moved to the three younglings. "They are not yet old enough to fend for themselves. In our culture, orphan hatchlings who cannot reach the sanctuary worlds they're considered lost to the void. What does that mean? Sarah asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. It means they will be left to die alone, the dragon replied. It is our way. The strong survive, and those who cannot survive on their own are not meant to continue the bloodline. Sarah felt a surge of anger that surprised her with its intensity. That's barbaric. It is tradition, the dragon said sadly. Just as your human traditions of warfare and conquest seem barbaric to many peaceful species. We also have traditions of protecting the innocent, Sarah said firmly, of caring for those who can't care for themselves. One of the baby dragons, this one with scales of deep blue, crawled closer to Sarah with obvious effort. Are you going to take care of us when Mommy goes to the forever sky? The question hit Sarah like a physical blow. She looked at the three tiny creatures, then at their dying mother, and then at her team. Burke was shaking his head slightly, the practical concerns obvious on his face. They were explorers, not refugees. They had no knowledge of dragon physiology, no idea how to care for alien children, and certainly no authority to make such a decision. But Sarah looked into those young eyes, eyes that held intelligence and awareness and hope, and felt the weight of the moment settling on her shoulders. What do they need to survive? She asked the mother dragon. Warmth, protection, and the songs of learning that will teach them to control their abilities as they grow. They must reach the sanctuary world of Verdania before their first molting, or they will become wild and dangerous. The dragon's breathing grew more labored. But humans cannot sing the songs. You cannot teach them what they need to know. Maybe not, Sarah admitted. But we can keep them safe until we find someone who can. The mother dragon's eyes filled with something that transcended species, gratitude, hope, and desperate love for her children. You would do this? For creatures not of your kind. Sarah looked at her team again. Dr. Vasquez was already pulling out her scanner, taking readings on the baby dragons. Torres was examining the chamber for threats. Martinez was checking his communication device, undoubtedly trying to figure out how they would explain this to command. Burke was still shaking his head, but she could see the conflict in his eyes, the practical officer warring with a decent human being. Yes, Sarah said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. We would do this. The mother dragon closed her eyes, and for a moment Sarah thought she had already passed. Then the great creature spoke again, her voice barely a whisper in their minds. Their names are Stella, the golden one with courage that burns like a star. Cosmos, the blue one whose mind reaches to distant places. And Echo, the silver one who remembers all songs once heard. The dragon's eyes opened one last time, fixing on Sarah with an intensity that seemed to look into her very soul. Promise me, human Sarah, promise me they will not die alone and forgotten. I promise, Sarah said without hesitation. Then I can go to the forever sky in peace. The dragon's great head settled onto the floor with a finality that needed no explanation. The three baby dragons let out cries of grief that filled the chamber and seemed to resonate through the ship itself. Sarah watched as the great dragon's breathing slowed and finally stopped, her massive form growing still. In the silence that followed, one of the baby dragons, Stella, the golden one, looked up at Sarah with eyes bright with tears. Are you our new mommy now? She asked in her tiny bell-like voice. Sarah felt the weight of the universe pressing down on her. She thought of the regulations, the complications, the impossibility of what she was committing to. Then she looked at the three orphan creatures who had just lost their entire world and decided that sometimes being human meant doing the impossible thing because it was the right thing. Yes, she said, reaching out to gently stroke Stella's small head. I guess I am. Burke stepped forward, his expression grim. Commander, with all due respect, what exactly are we going to tell Command when we return with 3 alien children and a story about dead dragons? Sarah stood, her mind already racing through possibilities and complications. We tell them the truth, Jim. We found beings in distress, And we did what humans do. We helped. This is going to change everything, you know, Dr. Vasquez said quietly, still taking readings on the young dragons. First contact protocol assumes adults, assumes established civilizations. This is unprecedented. Good, Sarah replied, watching as the three baby dragons huddled together, drawing comfort from each other in their grief. Maybe it's time for unprecedented. As her team began the complex process of preparing for the return to their ship with their unexpected charges, Sarah took one last look at the chamber where they had found them. The mother dragon lay still and peaceful, looking for all the world like she was merely sleeping. Around her, the bioluminescent panels pulsed gently, as if the ship itself was mourning. Sarah made a mental note to ensure the dragon received a proper burial according to whatever customs her people followed. It was the least they could do for a mother who had trusted strangers with her most precious possessions, her children's lives. "Come on," she said softly to the baby dragons, who looked up at her with trust that was both humbling and terrifying. "Let's get you somewhere warm and safe." As they made their way back to the Defiance, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that this moment, this choice to protect three orphaned alien children, was going to reshape humanity's relationship with the galaxy in ways she couldn't even begin to imagine. She had no idea how right she was. 3 weeks after the rescue, the diplomatic storm was still raging across the galaxy. Sarah sat in the sterile white waiting room outside Admiral Harrison's office at Lunar Command, watching news feeds scroll across the wall displays. The headlines changed language and format as different species networks rotated through, but the message was always the same. Human ship violates galactic orphan protocols. Earth vessel commits cultural interference. Dragons demand return of stolen hatchlings. "Commander Chun?" A young lieutenant appeared at her elbow. "The Admiral will see you now." Sarah straightened her dress uniform and walked into an office that had seen better days. Admiral Margaret Harrison looked like she hadn't slept in weeks, which was probably accurate given the crisis currently consuming her desk. The Admiral was a small, fierce woman in her 60s who had earned her stars during the Centauri War and was known throughout the fleet for her unwavering support of her officers. Today, she looked like that support was being tested to its limits. "Sit down, Sarah," Harrison said without looking up from the data pad she was reading. "Tell me again why you thought it was a good idea to adopt 3 alien children without consulting anyone." "They were orphans in distress," Sarah replied. "I made a field decision based on humanitarian principles. Humanitarian principles that have created the biggest diplomatic crisis since first contact with the Zephyrians." Harrison finally looked up, her gray eyes reflecting equal parts exhaustion and frustration. "Do you have any idea what's happening out there?" Sarah had more than an idea. For the past 3 weeks, she had been living it. The moment the Defiance had reached communication range with Earth, the situation had exploded into chaos. The Draconic High Council had immediately demanded the return of the hatchlings, citing ancient laws about orphan protocols. The Galactic Council had condemned humanity for cultural interference. 3 different species had threatened to break diplomatic ties with Earth over what they called typical human arrogance. "I know it's complicated," Sarah said, "but I also know that leaving 3 children to die alone would have been wrong, regardless of what anyone's laws say." Harrison sighed and activated a holographic display above her desk. The images that appeared made Sarah's breath catch in her throat. Stella, Cosmos, and Echo, the 3 baby dragons she had brought home. They were currently housed in a specially constructed habitat at the Lunar Research Station, and they had grown noticeably in just 3 weeks. Their scales were brighter, their wings stronger, and their eyes held an alertness that spoke of developing intelligence. "They're beautiful," Harrison admitted. "Dr. Vasquez's reports say they're developing faster than anyone expected. Their cognitive abilities are already approaching human adult levels, and they're beginning to manifest what the experts are calling practical telepathy." Sarah leaned forward. "They're also lonely and scared. They keep asking when they can come home." "That's part of the problem," Harrison said. Where exactly is home for them now? The Draconic Council says they belong on Verdania, in the traditional orphan sanctuaries. The xenobiologists want to study them. The diplomatic corps wants to use them as bargaining chips to smooth over relations. And you? Harrison paused. You want to raise them as your own children. I made a promise to their mother, Sarah said quietly. A promise that's tearing apart decades of careful diplomatic work. Harrison switched off the display and leaned back in her chair. Sarah, I've known you for 8 years. You're one of the best officers I've ever served with, and your instincts in the field are usually flawless. But this situation is bigger than one promise to a dying alien. Before Sarah could respond, Harrison's communication panel chimed with an urgent priority signal. The Admiral activated it, and the blue-tinted hologram of Secretary of State Amanda Richardson appeared above the desk. Admiral, I need to speak with Commander Chen immediately. We have a situation developing. Sarah felt her stomach drop. What kind of situation, Madam Secretary? Richardson's expression was grim. 20 minutes ago, a draconic strike force entered Sol System space. They're demanding immediate return of the hatchlings and threatening military action if we refuse. They've brought 6 heavy cruisers and what our intelligence suggests is a planet-killer-class vessel. The room fell silent. Sarah felt the blood drain from her face as the implications hit her. They're going to start a war over 3 children. It's not about the children anymore, Richardson replied. The Draconic Council is using this as a test case. They're saying that if humans can ignore galactic law whenever it suits them, then we're too dangerous to be allowed full membership in the galactic community. Admiral Harrison stood abruptly. What's our military response posture? Full defensive alert. The Sixth Fleet is moving to intercept, but Sarah, Richardson turned her attention to the commander. You need to understand something. The Dragons aren't just upset about broken protocols. They're terrified. Terrified of what? Of what those children might become under human influence. Richardson paused, choosing her words carefully. According to our cultural attaché, there's a legend in Draconic society about dragons raised outside their traditional structures. The story says they become something unprecedented, beings with dragon power, but without dragon restraint. The Council believes you're not just raising 3 orphans. They think you're creating potential weapons. Sarah stared at the hologram in disbelief. That's ridiculous. They're children. They play games. They ask for bedtime stories. They cry when they have nightmares about their mother. I know, Richardson said. But the Council doesn't see it that way. They see 3 developing telepaths with the potential for massive growth, being raised in what they consider a warrior culture. We're not a warrior culture, Sarah protested. Tell that to the Centaurians, or the vegan resistance, or any of the dozen other conflicts we've been involved in since joining the galactic community. Admiral Harrison's voice was sharp. Face it, Sarah, humanity has a reputation out there, and it's not as the peaceful explorers we like to think we are. The communication panel chimed again, this time with a different signal pattern. Admiral Harrison frowned at the display. That's the emergency channel from the research station. Dr. Vasquez's image appeared, and she looked panicked. Admiral, we have a problem. The hatchlings are responding to something. Their telepathic abilities have spiked beyond anything we've recorded, and they're asking for Commander Chen. They keep saying something about the angry voices in the sky. Sarah was on her feet before Vasquez finished speaking. They can sense the Draconic fleet? More than that, Vasquez replied. I think they're hearing the Council's deliberations. Stella keeps crying and saying that the old ones want to take us away from our new family. They're scared, Commander. Really scared. Admiral Harrison made a decision that would later be remembered as either brilliant leadership or career suicide. Secretary Richardson, I'm authorizing Commander Chun to return to the research station. If these children can sense what's happening, they deserve to understand it. Admiral, that's not. It's my call, Harrison said firmly. Sarah, get up there and talk to them. Find out what they know, what they want, and what they're capable of. We need all the information we can get before this situation spirals completely out of control. 2 hours later, Sarah stood in the specially designed habitat where the three dragon hatchlings had been living. The space was beautiful, a carefully crafted environment that mimicked the forests of Draconos, complete with synthetic trees, flowing water, and temperature control that kept the air warm and humid. But, despite the comfort, Sarah could see the stress in the young dragon's postures. They rushed to her the moment she entered, their small forms moving with surprising grace and speed. Stella, now nearly twice the size she had been 3 weeks ago, pressed against Sarah's legs while Cosmos and Echo flanked her on either side. Sarah Mom. Stella's mental voice was stronger now, more mature, but still carried the emotional weight of a frightened child. The angry voices in the sky want to take us away. They say you're not our real family. Sarah knelt down so she could look at them directly. What exactly are you hearing? Cosmos, the blue-scaled one with the gift for far-reaching telepathy, closed his eyes in concentration. There are many minds in the dark ships. They speak of laws and traditions and the danger of contamination. They call us corrupted hatchlings and say we must be purified before we infect other young ones. Sarah felt anger building in her chest. You're not corrupted. You're perfect exactly as you are. Echo, the silver one who remembered every song and story, spoke up with a voice that sounded older than her weeks. Sarah Mom, the old dragon voices carry memories of something called the Forbidden Time. There was a dragon long ago who was raised by a different species, and when he returned to the dragon worlds, he brought new ideas that changed everything. The council fears we will do the same. What kind of changes? Sarah asked. The memories are fragmented, Echo admitted. But the dragon who was raised away learned to see beyond the boundaries that defined his people. He questioned why orphans should be left to die. He asked why the strong could not share their strength with the weak. He believed that dragons could be more than what tradition demanded. Sarah felt pieces of understanding clicking together. And what happened to him? Stella's golden scales seemed to dim. The council declared him defective and exiled him to the void worlds. But his ideas spread among the young dragons before he was banished. It took generations for the council to restore what they called proper thinking. But they're not just afraid of you becoming different, Sarah realized. They're afraid of you becoming catalysts for change in their society. Yes, Cosmos said simply, and we can feel their fear. It tastes like metal and sounds like thunder. Sarah stood and walked to the habitat's viewing window. In the distance, she could see the lights of approaching ships, both human and draconic vessels positioning themselves for what could become the first interstellar war Earth had ever fought. All because she had refused to let 3 children die alone. Sarah Mom. Stella's voice was small and uncertain. Do you regret saving us? The question hit Sarah like a physical blow. She turned back to the 3 young dragons, seeing not the potential weapons the council feared or the diplomatic complications the politicians worried about, but simply 3 intelligent, feeling beings who had lost their mother and found hope in an unlikely place. Never, Sarah said firmly. I will never regret saving you, even if it means war. Echo asked. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, considering the weight of the question. Outside, 2 great civilizations were preparing for conflict over the rights of 3 orphan children. The rational part of her mind screamed that it wasn't worth it, that no individual lives were worth the destruction that was coming. But then she looked into their eyes that held intelligence and curiosity and love, and remembered the promise she had made to a dying mother. Even if it means war, Sarah said. Because some things are more important than politics or laws or traditions. Some things are worth fighting for. The 3 dragon hatchlings huddled closer together, their scales shimmering with the complex emotions they were processing. Finally, Stella looked up at Sarah with an expression of determination that seemed far too mature for her young face. Then, we have something to tell you, she said. Something the angry voices don't know we can do. What do you mean? Cosmos stepped forward, his blue scales beginning to glow with an inner light that Sarah had never seen before. We've been learning, Sarah Mom, not just from you, but from the memories our mother shared with us in her final moments. We know things about dragon abilities that the Council believes are lost. Echo joined her brother, silver scales beginning to resonate with the same ethereal glow. The old songs speak of dragons who could touch the minds of any sentient being, regardless of species. Dragons who could share thoughts and emotions across vast distances. The Council believes these abilities died out centuries ago. Stella completed the circle, her golden scales now blazing with warm light that filled the habitat. But they didn't die out. They were just sleeping, waiting for the right moment to awaken. Sarah felt a tingling in her mind, like the gentle touch of a familiar hand. Suddenly, she could sense the emotions of the three young dragons with perfect clarity. Their love for her, their fear of the approaching conflict, their determination to protect their new family just as their new family had protected them. We can do more than just hear the angry voices, Stella continued. We can speak to them. We can show them what we've learned about different ways of thinking and being. We can bridge the gap between species if they'll let us. Sarah stared at the three glowing young dragons, feeling the magnitude of what they were offering. You're talking about direct telepathic contact with the Draconic Council fleet. More than that, Cosmos said. We're talking about showing them that change doesn't have to mean destruction. That different doesn't have to mean dangerous. And if they refuse to listen? The three dragons looked at each other, and Sarah felt their shared resolve through their telepathic connection. Then, we'll show the whole galaxy that some bonds are stronger than fear, Echo said, and that love can exist between any beings willing to open their hearts. As alarms began to sound throughout the station, signaling that the Draconic fleet had moved into attack position, Sarah realized that the next few hours would determine not just the fate of three orphan dragon children, but possibly the future of interspecies relations throughout the galaxy. And somehow, against all odds and reason, she found herself believing that three young dragons and one stubborn human might just be enough to change everything. The communication chamber aboard the Draconic flagship Eternal Flame had not been used for its original purpose in over 300 years. Built during the early days of dragon civilization when telepathic communication across vast distances was common, the chamber was now little more than a historical curiosity. Most modern dragons had lost the ability to project their thoughts beyond their immediate vicinity, and the Council preferred the certainty of electronic communication to the unpredictability of mental contact. High Counselor Pyrolith stood at the chamber's center, his massive form dwarfing the crystalline amplification arrays that surrounded him. At nearly 1,000 years old, he was among the eldest of the current council, and his copper-colored scales bore the patina of age and authority. He had agreed to this unprecedented contact only because the alternative was a war that would devastate both civilizations. Are the hatchlings truly capable of what the humans claim? Asked Counselor Valeth, her voice echoing through the chamber's curved walls. The younger dragon's silver scales reflected the light from the amplification crystals as she took her position at one of the secondary arrays. We shall see, Pyrolith rumbled. If this is some human deception, we will know soon enough. If it is not, he paused, his ancient eyes reflecting uncertainties he rarely allowed himself to acknowledge. If it is not, then perhaps we have underestimated what these children might become. Aboard the research station, Sarah watched as the three dragon hatchlings positioned themselves in the center of their habitat. They had grown again in just the past few hours, their forms now roughly the size of large dogs, and the glow emanating from their scales had intensified until it filled the entire space with warm, shifting light. Are you sure about this? Sarah asked for the 10th time. Stella looked up at her with eyes that seemed to hold wisdom far beyond her weeks of life. We have to try, Sarah Mom. The angry voices are getting louder, and we can feel the fear building in both fleets. Soon it will be too late for words. Cosmos nodded agreement, his blue scales pulsing with the rhythm of his thoughts. We can sense the High Counselor now. His mind is old and rigid, but beneath the hardness, there is pain. He grieves for hatchlings lost to the old ways, but he believes change means chaos. Echo completed their assessment with the perspective only she could provide. The songs remember other times when the council faced change. Most ended in tragedy because no one was willing to bridge the gap between old and new. Dr. Vasquez stood at her monitoring station, watching readouts that were spiking beyond anything they had recorded. Commander, their telepathic output is increasing exponentially. If this continues, they might be able to reach minds clear across the solar system. Sarah felt her heart racing as she watched the 3 young dragons she had come to love preparing to risk everything for the chance of peace. "What do you need me to do?" "Be here," Stella said simply. "Let them see through our connection what it means to be part of a human family. Show them that love doesn't require sameness." The 3 hatchlings pressed together, their scales now blazing so brightly that the habitat's automatic lighting dimmed to compensate. Sarah felt the familiar touch in her mind, but this time it was different, stronger, deeper, carrying with it sensations and emotions that belonged to an entirely different species. Then, like a flower blooming in fast motion, the connection expanded beyond anything she could have imagined. High Counselor Pyrolith stumbled backward as 3 young voices touched his mind with a gentleness he had not experienced in centuries. He expected the chaotic mental noise typical of untrained hatchlings, but instead found himself enveloped in a harmony that spoke of incredible control and purpose. "Honored Elder," came the voice of the golden hatchling, carrying with it waves of respect and affection. "We greet you with the songs of our mother and the love of our new family." Pyrolith's first instinct was to reject the contact, to slam shut the mental barriers he had maintained for so long. But something in the quality of that young voice stopped him. It carried the formal patterns of proper draconic communication, but underneath lay something new, an openness and joy that he had not sensed in a dragon mind for decades. "Impossible," he whispered aloud. "How do you know the ancient greeting forms?" "Our mother sang them to us in her final moments," replied the blue hatchling. "But we have learned more than just the old songs, Honored Elder. We have learned new ones." And then Pyrolith experienced something that would haunt him for the rest of his very long life. The 3 young dragons opened their minds completely, allowing him to see and feel everything they had experienced since their rescue. He felt the terror and grief of losing their mother, the confusion of waking in an alien environment, and the gradual realization that the strange bipedal creatures caring for them meant no harm. But most powerfully, he felt the moment when fear transformed into love. He experienced Sarah's gentle touch as she comforted them during nightmares about their mother. He felt the warmth of being read stories from human culture while nestled in soft blankets. He sensed the patient kindness of Dr. Vasquez as she learned to understand their needs and preferences. He witnessed the protective anger of the entire research team when bureaucrats suggested the hatchlings should be treated as specimens rather than individuals. This is what it means to be part of a human family. The silver hatchling explained as Pyrolith reeled from the intensity of the shared experiences. "They do not love us because we are dragons or because we will be powerful when we grow. They love us because we are ourselves, because we laugh and play and dream and hope." Pyrolith found his carefully maintained composure cracking as he experienced emotions he had thought lost to time. When was the last time he had felt such unconditional acceptance? When had he last experienced love that asked nothing in return except the chance to give more love? But "You are changing," he managed a project, clinging to the arguments that had brought him across the galaxy. "You are becoming something other than what dragons should be." "Yes," came a unified response from all 3 hatchlings. "We are becoming something new. And that is not a tragedy, it is a gift." What followed next would later be described by xenopsychologists as the most complex telepathic communication ever recorded. The 3 young dragons began to share not just their experiences, but their dreams and possibilities. They showed Pyrolith visions of a future where dragon orphans were not left to die, were cherished and raised with love regardless of their origin. They shared images of dragons working alongside other species, their natural abilities used to heal and protect rather than dominate and control. They showed him a galaxy where different did not mean dangerous, where change was embraced as growth rather than feared as corruption. The old ways preserve tradition, Stella explained with a maturity that belied her age. But they also preserve suffering. How many hatchlings have been lost to the void because they could not prove their strength alone? How many potential contributions to our people have been wasted because they did not fit the expected mold? Cosmos added his own perspective, his thoughts carrying the weight of possibilities glimpsed through his far-reaching telepathic abilities. We have touched the minds of humans throughout their ship. They are not the savage warriors our histories describe. They are complex beings capable of great violence, yes, but also capable of incredible compassion. They save those who need saving, even when it costs them everything. Echo's voice joined her brother's, carrying with it the accumulated weight of all the songs and stories she had absorbed. The human songs speak of growth through diversity, of strength found in protecting the vulnerable. These are not alien concepts, honored elder. They echo in our own most ancient ballads, the ones sung before the Great Ordering. Pyrolith felt something fundamental shifting in his worldview as he absorbed what the hatchlings were showing him. For generations, the council had maintained order through rigid tradition, believing that any deviation from established patterns would lead to chaos. But these children, these impossible, wonderful children, were living proof that change could lead to growth rather than destruction. What you propose would overturn millennia of carefully maintained order, he said, though his conviction was wavering. What we propose, came Sarah's voice, now somehow part of the telepathic link, is that order built on suffering might not be worth maintaining. Pyrolith was shocked to find himself in direct mental contact with the human commander. Her thoughts were alien but not incomprehensible, structured differently from dragon cognition, but carrying the same fundamental emotions of love, fear, hope, and determination. You dare to judge our ways, human? I dare to question any way that leaves children to die alone, Sarah replied with a firmness that reminded Pyrolith of the most determined dragon matriarchs he had known. I don't claim your traditions are wrong, only that they're incomplete. You've built a society that preserves the strong, but at what cost? How much potential have you lost? How much beauty have you sacrificed? Through the link, Sarah began to share her own experiences. The joy of watching the three hatchlings discover new ideas, the wonder of their first experiments with human technology, the simple pleasure of their laughter during playtime. But she also shared her fears, the terror of not knowing if she was doing right by them, the constant worry that she might be failing them somehow, the desperate hope that love would be enough to help them become whoever they were meant to be. This is what we offer, Sarah continued. Not the replacement of your ways, but the expansion of them. A chance for dragon children to have more options than survival alone or death in the void. Pyrolith felt the weight of countless years pressing down on him as he considered what the humans were proposing. Around him, he sensed the other council members struggling with the same revelations, their rigid certainties crumbling in the face of undeniable proof that another way was possible. Then Stella did something that none of the adults, human or dragon, had expected. She began to sing. It started as a simple melody, a lullaby that Sarah had taught her during one of their first nights together. But as the song continued, it transformed, becoming something entirely new, a fusion of human harmony and dragon tonal structure that created beauty neither species could have achieved alone. Cosmos and Echo joined their sister, their voices weaving together in patterns that spoke of unity without uniformity, of strength found in diversity rather than in isolation. The song told the story of their journey from loss to love, but it also spoke of possibilities yet to be explored, of futures where different species could share not just space, but understanding. As the impossible harmony filled both the research station and the draconic command ship, Pyrolith felt something he had not experienced in centuries. Hope for genuine change. Honored Elder. Stella's voice came softly as the song faded. We ask not for the abandonment of our people's ways, but for the chance to show that those ways can grow. Let's be the bridge between what was and what could be. Pyrolith looked around the communication chamber at his fellow council members. In their ancient eyes, he saw the same mixture of wonder and uncertainty that he felt in his own heart. They had come here prepared for war, expecting to face corrupted hatchlings who had been turned into weapons by human manipulation. Instead, they had found something unprecedented. Young dragons who had indeed been changed by their contact with humanity, but changed in ways that enhanced their draconic nature rather than replacing it. Finally, Pyrolith made the decision that would reshape galactic civilization. The Council will consider what you have shown us, he announced formally. But there must be conditions. If these hatchlings are to serve as bridges between our peoples, they must be trained in both traditions, human and dragon. They must learn the ancient songs and the new harmonies. They must understand the weight of what they carry. We understand, Cosmos replied gravely. We will be students of both worlds and teachers to both as well. And the other orphans? Echo asked, her voice carrying the weight of countless lost hatchlings. What of those who come after us? Pyrolith closed his ancient eyes and felt the weight of tradition warring with the promise of hope. When he opened them again, his decision was final. The orphan protocols will be reconsidered. Perhaps it is time for our people to learn that strength can be found in places other than solitude. Months later, Sarah stood in the observation deck of the new interspecies cultural exchange station, watching as 3 young dragons played with a group of human children in the recreation area below. Stella, Cosmos, and Echo had grown dramatically, now roughly the size of Earth horses, but they moved among the smaller humans with careful grace and obvious affection. Hard to believe it's been a year, Admiral Harrison said, joining Sarah at the viewing window. The older woman looked remarkably relaxed for someone who had just overseen the most complex diplomatic negotiation in human history. Sometimes it feels like yesterday, Sarah replied. Other times it feels like a lifetime. Below them, Stella was teaching a group of human children a simple draconic harmony, while Cosmos helped others build what appeared to be a miniature spacecraft out of construction blocks. Echo sat slightly apart, singing softly to a toddler who had fallen asleep in her warm embrace. The Galactic Council meeting went well. Sarah asked, better than well. The motion to establish the Joint Species Orphan Protection Initiative passed with overwhelming support. Apparently, the story of 3 dragon children and a stubborn human commander has become something of a legend across the galaxy. Harrison paused, her expression growing thoughtful. There are already 12 other species requesting to participate in the program. Sarah felt a warmth spreading through her chest as she watched her adopted children. For that's what they were officially now, thanks to the new interspecies adoption protocols, continue their play. They were exactly what everyone had predicted they would become. Bridges between worlds, living proof that love could transcend the boundaries between species. But they were also something no one had expected. They were simply children. Children who laughed and learned and dreamed, who had nightmares sometimes and needed comfort, who asked endless questions about everything from quantum physics to why humans needed to cook their food. Sarah Ma, Stella's telepathic voice, touched her mind with the familiar warmth of home. Come play with us. We're teaching the little ones how to sing in harmony. Sarah smiled and headed for the door. I'm coming. As she made her way to the recreation area, Sarah reflected on the impossible journey that had brought them all to this point. A year ago, she had been a simple exploration commander following a distress beacon. Now she was the adoptive mother of 3 dragon children, an interspecies diplomat, and, somehow, a symbol of what could be accomplished when beings chose compassion over protocol. The 3 young dragons surrounded her the moment she entered the recreation area, their scales shimmering with joy and their mental voices filled with love. Around them, human and alien children continued their games, accepting the dragon's presence with the casual adaptability that seemed to be childhood's greatest gift. "We've been thinking," Cosmos said as he settled beside Sarah on the soft grass of the play area. "When we're grown and the time comes for us to choose our own paths, we want to do something special." "Oh," Sarah asked, stroking his blue scales affectionately. "What did you have in mind?" Echo looked up from where she was still cradling the sleeping toddler. "We want to start a school. A place where children from all species can come to learn about each other, to grow up together like we did." Stella added her own voice to the plan, her golden scales bright with excitement. "We could teach them the songs that bridge worlds, show them that different doesn't mean dangerous." Sarah felt tears gathering in her eyes as she listened to her children, her impossible, wonderful children, plan a future built on the same principles that had brought them together: love, acceptance, the radical notion that families could be formed by choice rather than biology. "I think," she said softly, pulling all three of them close, "that sounds like the most beautiful idea I've ever heard." As the artificial evening cycle began in the station sky simulation, Sarah sat surrounded by 3 young dragons and a dozen human children, all of them singing together in a harmony that no single species could have created alone. Outside the station's windows, ships from 100 different worlds moved through space, carrying passengers and cargo and ideas between the stars. But here in this small recreation area where children of different species played together without fear or prejudice, the real work of building a better galaxy was being done, one song, one story, one moment of shared joy at a time. Sarah had kept her promise to a dying dragon mother. But in doing so, she had given the galaxy something it had never known it needed: proof that love truly could transcend any boundary, heal any wound, and build bridges across the vastest distances between different ways of being. And as the children's voices rose in harmony around her, Sarah couldn't help but smile at the beautiful impossibility of it all. Sometimes, it turned out, the most unthinkable act was simply choosing to love when everyone else chose to fear. Sometimes that choice was enough to change everything.